Okay, so in the previous video we manipulated the file m22trips.csv to be in the form of first normal form. So we made sure it satisfied all the criteria for a 1NF table, or table that's going to be imported into a database, which will then be considered to be first normal form in that database. So data dictionary is pretty much just stating what your field names are going to be for this table, what the data types are, what the field sizes are going to be, and then stating any other important information about this table that you're going to import into Access. So this is going to be done in an evidence document. So I'm just going to open up a Microsoft Word file for now, and this is for step 2. So I'm going to name this task 2. And this is going to be the data dictionary for the trips table. So the trips table is this table that we used in the previous video. So when you're making this data dictionary, we're going to have 4 main headings, but we're going to start by putting in 6 columns for this table that we're going to make, which is going to be our data dictionary. So to insert a table into Word, you're going to go to Insert at the top, Table. We're just going to use 6 columns for now. We don't have to worry about the rows just yet. So we're going to have 4 main headings. So the first heading is going to be field names. And these headings we'd have to know off by heart. Data types, field size, and then these 3 cells over here we're going to merge. But before we merge, I'm just going to go to the last cell and just hit Tab, just so a new row is made just before we merge these cells. So I'm going to merge these 3, right click, merge cells, and this heading is going to be other metadata. So it's going to be one word, metadata. And then I'm going to center align these. Just make them bold. Okay, cool. So now we're going to put the information of our table into this data dictionary. So the field names of our table are going to be these headings over here: student ID, forename, surname, trip ID, etc. Those are the field names of this table. So we're going to go student ID. I'm going to tab across, forename, tab across, surname, tab across. Then it's going to be trip ID, cost, tab, 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 cost. And then the next one is going to be paid, and then destination. So these are the field names. And now what we need to do is to assign appropriate data types for these fields. So when you import into Access, usually in the import wizard you're going to go to the advanced button, and then you're going to set the data types for your fields. So if you look at, for example, student ID, if you have letters and numbers, this is just text. If it was only numbers, then it could be numeric. But if you have text and numbers, it is text, or in other words, alphanumeric. So the data type for student ID is alphanumeric. I'm going to copy this to save time. So forename, that is text, surname's text, and trip ID is text as well. In other words, these 3 columns, or for these field names, this data over here, that's all alphanumeric. So this is alphanumeric, alphanumeric, alphanumeric. Cost and paid, you can see these are numbers, but usually instead of assigning numeric to numbers that we see, if we can specifically choose currency as a data type, then we're going to choose that instead of numeric as the data type. So cost and paid, these values over here would be currency. So cost is currency and paid is currency, and then destination, this is text, so it's alphanumeric. Now field size, you can usually assign a field size if you can see that a certain field does have a maximum number of characters for that field. So for example, if you look at student ID over here, these look like they could possibly be of the same length and have a max length. So I'm just going to use the len function just to see how long each of these student IDs are. So I'm going to replicate all the way down, and you can see that all of them are 7 characters long. So the field size for student ID is 7. Okay, so usually forename and surnames, we would usually, if more information is entered in the database, we would usually allow an unlimited amount of characters for forename and surname. We wouldn't really put a restriction on how long someone's forename is or surname is. So these will leave. Trip ID though, we can see that these, like the student ID, have a set amount of characters or maximum amount of characters, and you can see it's 3. So field size for trip ID is 3. Cost and paid, similar, we don't really want to put restrictions on cost or paid or certain amounts or numbers, so that we're going to leave. And destination, we're not going to restrict as well. There's no real certain amount of characters that we're going to restrict the name of a destination to. So I'm just going to delete these 7s. That was just to check the length of the student ID. So that takes care of field size. And now any other important information we can now add under other metadata. So you can put different information under each of these columns. So for example, we decided in this file over here that student ID and trip ID would form our compound key in this table. So for student ID, we're just going to mention that this is part of the compound key. And then for trip ID, we're also going to mention that it's the compound key. And then in this table, if you're looking at currency, usually if you're working with currency, your values will be to 2 decimal places. So although it doesn't look like it over here, we can allow that our currency goes to 2 decimal places at most. We don't want to have currency that goes to like 3 decimal places, for example. So 2 decimal places for the currency. So you can say like 2DP means 2 decimal places, 2DP. And we can have validation rules also in your database. In other words, if you type in the cost or the paid values, for example, under paid, the lowest value in this list is 0. You can see that there are some zeros. So pretty much, for example, how much someone has paid so far. So this person, for example, has paid 0 towards this trip, for example. So the lowest value that can go into this paid column is 0. So what we can say here for the paid, we can say the validation must be that our values are greater than or equal to 0. And we can come back at the end and maybe just resize everything in this table if you want it to fit or look a little bit nicer. That's validation for paid. And then if you look at costs, how much something costs, it will never be 0, but the value over here will be greater than 0. Remember, you can't have any negative values either for cost or paid. So the validation for cost is that the values must be greater than 0. And finally, if you go back to the question, if you read this part over here, This will help us also to recognize that the currency would be to 2 decimal places, or they say use your local currency where appropriate. Format this to 2 decimal places so that we can get the 2DP from. But you'll notice that the geography department to hold details of 6 field trips to different places. So in other words, if you look at your trip ID, because it's only going to 6 different places, you'll notice that the trip ID, there are only 6 different trip IDs. So you'll see some of them start to come up again and again, like G48, 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 and it goes to cliff erosion, for example, as the destination. So in other words, we can restrict the trip ID in such a way that only the 6 different trip IDs can be entered for this field. So we're going to go back to Word, and for trip ID, we can say that the validation for trip ID, validation to restrict to the 6 trips. And then that's it. So this is our data dictionary. So it's up to you if you want to move things around so that it looks a little bit better. And maybe center, for example, the field size, but that is up to you. So this is the data dictionary for the trips table.